Welcome back, everybody, to the Hear Me Out Sports Podcast. We're talking week 3 recap, two guys that we've hit on so far in fantasy football and two guys that we've missed on so far in fantasy football. And then we're going to be answering some of your guys' mailbag questions. So let's get to it. Okay, starting off first with two guys that each of us have hit on so far that we were high on during the fantasy football preseason that have so far showed out through week 3. Jace, who are the two guys that you think that you got
Yeah,
right so
let me
far?
kick it off with one person who I was highest on out of the three of us, and Kayana was the lowest on by a long shot, and that is Lamar Jackson. He's had a phenomenal showing through these first 3 weeks. He's the number one rated quarterback. He's averaging 34.7 points per game, which is absolutely ridiculous, especially given that quarterbacks have kind of struggled this year, as we've seen with Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady. We'll get there later. But I mean, one thing I want to point out is his passing touchdowns. He's got 10 passing touchdowns, and he's only got 2 rushing touchdowns. Which, from old Lamar Jackson, I think we would think that those numbers might be reversed. They'd be using him a lot more in the running game than in the passing game. But I mean, I think he's really proving himself this season that he's an actual quarterback. He's not just a running back. So that's my number one. I think he was rated 3 at the beginning of the season for myself. So that was a big hit. The other one, Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now, I had him in the top 15, but right now, if you look at the points in PPR leagues, fantasy points per game, he ranks third, only behind Stephon Diggs and Cooper Kupp, which it's hard to beat those two out. So that is very impressive. I don't think anyone really saw that coming. I have him. I'm in 4 leagues right now, and I have him in 3 of those 4 leagues. He was a late round pickup because most people kind of brushed him off. When I say late round, I just mean not in the top 4 usually. He might have been in that 5th or 6th round, but he has had a great showing. He's gotten lots of targets. Now, what has yet to be determined is how the Lions are going to move forward. If they're going to go back more to the running game, if they're going to keep spreading it around like they did in week 3 to different receivers, and just seeing how he feels after coming off a little bit of an ankle sprain. It seems like it shouldn't be much of an issue, but I think he's still going to post up some big numbers. Chanson, what are your thoughts?
Oh, dude, Lamar Jackson, you hit it for sure. MVP level season so far. Man's killing it. He's trying to prove the doubters wrong. He's playing for a contract, and man, props to the man. He's showing out. The only game that he got knocked for, well, I guess they lost. He didn't really get knocked for it. It was the game that he had a 75-yard rushing touchdown and an 80-yard touchdown pass. First time it's ever happened this season. He hasn't really had a game where he slowed down. Even with the weapons he has, he doesn't have any. Like, he only has Mark Andrews and Rashad Bateman, but he's making it work. So. Yeah. Anyways, I got 2 hits. My first one, Cordero Patterson, Atlanta Falcons. Last year, I picked him up mid-season because he was, he's doing good. So I picked him up, and people didn't know how to play him because he's actually a wide receiver naturally. But the Falcons run him mainly as a running back, as their RB1 too. But he also goes out wide. He plays in the slot. He goes everywhere. So he racks up points because naturally he's on the field a lot. He gets a lot of those target shares, and he gets a lot of the handoff. He gets the majority of the handoffs. So this year, same thing happening. Cordell Patterson, he's doing really good. He had one bad game, but those games, expect to see those by Cordell Patterson, whether he plays a stiff run defense like the Los Angeles Rams naturally. So they had his number. He plays the Bucks twice. I wouldn't play him in those games because the Bucks do have a notorious running defense as well. But other than that, he's doing solid. Another hit of mine. Let's see. It would
Real quick, I want to comment on
be
it too. Cordero Patterson, Kyon and I actually had a discussion on when Tyler Algier was going to take his place, and man, it might not be this season, which I'm kind of worried about. I don't know if Kayana, if you agree with that, but from the big load that Algier has gotten to take, I think it was in week 2, he had something like 10 carries for 30 yards, which isn't that impressive.
Yeah, I'd agree, but I don't really know what Arthur Smith's thinking over there in Atlanta. You have a young team you need to develop. Cordero Patterson's not part of that future, so I'm surprised. Let's just say that way. But Chanson, who's the second guy you think you've hit on so far?
Yeah, the other hit. Sorry, it's Mark Andrews actually tight end. I had him at number 1, and like I said, going with the Lamar Jackson, he is Lamar Jackson's number 1 target, and I knew that was going to be the case going into the season. And man, Mark Andrews lighting it up so far. He is his number one weapon besides Rashad Bateman. Rashad Bateman coming on to a surprise season so far. But yeah, I got that the tight end and Cordell Patterson as my two hits.
Nice. So for me, the first hit I'll talk about is Saquon Barkley. A lot of people were worried about him coming off injury on a relatively bad Giants team, but I had him ranked third in my running back rankings going into the year, and he's currently after week 3 PPR running back number 1. So he's been awesome, and that's without him having any like explosion games. He's just had 3 solid games, but no explosions yet. And he's ranked number 1. So yeah, I was super high on Saquon, especially compared to most analysts, and so far so good. And that's with playing against a pretty solid Dallas defense too in week 3. So he's been awesome. My other hit has been Tua, and I was going back and forth to either say Tua or Trevor Lawrence. So I'm like one of the only people who had Tua anywhere near the top 8 quarterbacks, and he's showed out so far. I get that one of his games he had 6 touchdowns, but he's been good in every game so far. So Tua's been awesome. He's been a big hit for me. We'll move to the other side now, and we'll talk guys we've missed. And I'll kick off with this one. So I guess my first miss that I'll talk about is Alvin Kamara, another running back. So due to injury, you could blame it on that, but I'm actually not blaming it on that. I think that Jameis Winston pretty much destroys Kamara's value because he doesn't check down the ball. He
Yeah.
just throws it deep every play. So it looks like Jameis of old, which is what I predicted at the beginning of the season with Sean Payton gone. I don't think Dennis Allen's going to be a good head coach. Called it at the beginning of the year. Saints aren't good. Said that at the beginning of the year. And I got a lot of flack from Saints fans, but hey, through 3 weeks, they look like crap. So
I think they're
Jameis throws the ball too
yeah.
deep. Yep. Jameis throws the ball deep way too much, doesn't check it down to Kamara even when he's open. So Kamara just really hasn't been what I thought he was. He thought he could be, I should say. So he's been a miss for me for sure. Um, I guess my other big miss, and I took him in almost every league I could this year, is Elijah Moore, the receiver for the Jets. So through 3 weeks, he has been pretty bad. Not in how he plays. His skill set's there for sure, but he just hasn't had the production yet. I thought going with Joe Flacco, specifically without Zach Wilson, that he'd be better, and it hasn't come to fruition yet. But he's got good target share still, relatively good target share, and air yards per target. So I think that Elijah Moore still has that time to bounce back, especially with it's kind of crazy, but especially with Zach Wilson coming back. I don't think that Zach Wilson's going to check it down as much to his running backs. Joe Flacco seems to throw 15 passes a game to his running backs. So I think that Zach Wilson, when he's back, will throw the ball to the receivers more. I expect Elijah Moore to bounce back, but so far, definitely been a miss for me. Jace, who are
Real
your
quick, I'm
misses
gonna
so
jump on
far?
that. We also discussed, I think it was last week, about Joe Flacco versus Wilson and him coming back and seeing how that would be. Listen, off his last game, Wilson's a safe star. I feel like so. We'll see how that goes. It's kind of a losing situation there, though. I'm also going to cover another running or another receiver and another quarterback. My receiver is a receiver 1 on this team, and it didn't look like it was going to be a terrible team at the beginning of the season, but it has turned out to be a terrible team. Uh, DJ Moore on Kiana, your Carolina Panthers. Um, I can't trust anyone on the Panthers when I'm starting them in fantasy. I've had DJ Moore in one of my leagues, and I've played him in all 3 weeks. And 1 week I didn't super regret it, but it's very average numbers. It was 13 points in a PPR league, which isn't great for a receiver 1 on any team. And he's averaging only 7.9 points per game, and it's mainly coming from his targets. I believe he's only getting 18 targets so far in the first 3 weeks, which is not that many. We've discussed it. I don't want to go too far into it because people can just watch our other videos. But Carolina doesn't really have an offensive scheme, and they don't really have a direction. And Baker Mayfield looked horrible last week, so I just can't trust it for the time being. Now, for my other person, we're going to jump back over the quarterbacks. And frick, if someone would have said this was a miss at the beginning of the season, people would have thought I was crazy. Aaron Rodgers. He is just one of those notoriously good quarterbacks who seems consistent and can do what he needs to. I know some people were concerned about him not having the receiver core that he's had in the past, especially with Devontae Adams leaving. And yeah, there was concern, but he has good running backs and young team, so he could still put up, I guess, good numbers. But now that we've seen him, I mean, he's averaging 12.7 points per game, which is not impressive. He is ranked 26 as far as points per game go in quarterbacks. He's barely above Matt Ryan, who has looked horrible, and he's below Russell Wilson, who has also looked horrible. And then when you go for passing yards, Geno Smith is right above him. Which, listen, if Geno Smith is beating him out, that's just something weird's going on. So he was another
That's sad.
miss. I'm
Yep.
not stoked about that one. I am stoked as a Lions fan about that one, but he's getting very mediocre or low average numbers, below average numbers. So that's how I feel about that. Chanton, who are your two misses?
Oh yeah. So going with my two misses. Unfortunately, I have to say it. Tom Brady. He's a miss so far. I had him third out of respect going into the season because last year, man, the guy was on fire. I think he got robbed of an MVP because he had the most passing yards, passing touchdowns. The only thing he didn't have is a higher completion percentage than Aaron Rodgers. Anyways, Tom Brady, he's played two good defenses and one uh, above average defense in the Saints. And on top of that, he hasn't had all three of his receivers except for the first two quarters of the Cowboys game. And since then, he hasn't had all three. He didn't have all three of them in the Packers game. He out of from last year, out of those five starting offensive linemen, only one of them is healthy, and that's Tristan Wirfs, the right tackle. Um, Other than that, they're all new in the front. So I think that's why you're seeing his offense slowing down and he's having a slower production. But he's a miss so far. Now I don't think he's gonna stay a miss. I think by the tail end of the season, like from mid-season on, when people are healthy. Anyways, yeah. So I think by mid-season till the end of the season, Tom Brady should pick it up. His offense will be better, but so far definitely a miss. My other miss, it's Derrick Henry. I mean, I have my concerns going the season, but just based on who he is and who the production he's done, I had to put him in the top 5 or top 10 in my running back list. But dude, he's not doing good. He had one good game last game, but that was against the only 0-3 team in the league, the Raiders. Um, his offensive line is just injured. His quarterback is flustered. They don't really know what they're doing on offense, and everyone knows Derrick Henry's going to get the ball probably 15, 20 times a game. And if they can just stop that, they're most likely going to beat the Titans. So
Now
definitely a miss in
I'm
my
gonna
opinion.
comment on that because I am also high on Derrick Henry. Um, I have a feeling that he could turn it around. Those first 2 weeks, it was a tough defense, especially week 2, and they really had his number. I mean, they knew who he was, and they had the defense to stop him. Week 3 made me think that maybe there is more to this. I know it's not necessarily the greatest team they face off against, but I wouldn't say it's the worst team either. So I think there is a chance he could bounce back from this, but yeah, you're right. So far, he hasn't put up the same numbers as he did last year. So in that respect, he's definitely a miss for like a round 1 pick.
Nice.
Well, I think we're going from here. We're going to do some mailbag questions. Um, I got one. Kayana, you probably have the majority of them, though.
Yeah, what's the one you got?
Yeah, so the one that I have, it's coming from Successful May 2015. Um, he, she, they, they're asking, are fantasy football leagues now transitioning from drafting running backs heavy to drafting wide receivers early and heavy? And I'll start off since that's the question that I got. I think what we're seeing this year, I don't know if this is an off year, but I think strategy wise, going from this year on, I think it's best to draft wide receivers high and running backs low because there's not too many running backs actually that are getting a ton of numbers and a ton of productions. The big numbers that we're seeing are receivers, and there's a lot of them that are getting big numbers. Running backs, man, there's there's a few of them and far and few between.
So,
So I don't know what you guys think, but I think right now wide receiver early and heavy is kind of a good
so
strategy.
I've seen a lot of talk, specifically on Twitter, from fantasy analysts about this is called the zero running back strategy, right? Where you pretty much go heavy receivers and hope to get a running back in round 8, 9, 10. Um,
Yep.
so I'm of the belief that you go on with a general plan to drafts, but that you always zag when everyone else is zigging. So if you go into a draft and everyone's drafting receivers, then the value for receivers plummets because you're not
Gone.
going to be getting the good ones. So I think in that case, you might want to take a running back because if you can get a top tier running back, great. I mean, it's all relative value though. If you had a league where every position is a flex position, then yeah, I'd say just take receivers. But since most leagues you have specific, you have to play a running back in one or two slots,
Yep.
it's still important because you're going to have the relative advantage over other people if you get one of those top five running backs that are producing on a weekly basis. Whereas when there's 25, 30, 35 receivers that are all producing, it doesn't matter if you have wide receiver 21 instead of wide receiver 11. It's only 2 point difference. Where if you draft a bad running back, it could be a 10 point difference. So, um, again, I'm not telling you to draft one way or the other. I'm saying that if everyone's taking receivers, take a running back. If everyone's taking running backs, definitely take receivers. So that's my thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll comment real quick. I think probably running backs, you're dropping off around number 8 or 10. As far as once you hit the 10th running back, it's gonna drop kind of significantly, and there's definitely less options. So that's why I usually go running back first because I need to make sure I have the one or two that you have in your league, and then I also have one who can fill in on a bye week or who can fill in as a flex. So if you want three decent running backs, I mean, you're going to have to draft them kind of earlier. Receivers, there's just typically more out there, and there's a lot easier, I feel like, to still a late round good receiver.
Yeah, and to give people an idea, so again, I use my strategy that I just tell everyone where I go against the grain. I'm in 14 different leagues this year. That's dynasty and redraft leagues. And through 3 games, my teams are 38-4. So I only have 4 losses in 14 different leagues through the first 3 weeks. And some of those teams I drafted running backs the first 3 rounds, and some teams I drafted receivers the first 3 rounds. So again, just go against the grain, and that's the best advice I can give. But okay, moving on. So here's a question I have, and it's from at FF Dynasty Dude. So I'm assuming this is a guy. And his question is, if you had to take one quarterback for a dynasty league, would you take Tua or would you take Trevor Lawrence? Oh, actually, there's a third guy: Tua, Trevor Lawrence, or Justin Herbert. So, what do you guys think?
I'll start it off. I mean, right now I'm not taking Herbert. I mean, he has production, but I don't trust Staley as a coach for an offense. Honestly, I don't think he utilizes people he needs to. But the person I would take first is I'm going to have to say right now is Tua Tagovailoa because he has a one of the greatest offensive minds, young offensive minds, and a head coach, and he has those weapons to fulfill that vision that his coach has.
Jace, who would you take out of those
So I'm,
three?
I'm actually split. I wouldn't take Tua because I feel like he was on his way out, and because he got loaded up, he now has some more pride and glory there in Miami. I was split between Trevor Lawrence and Justin Herbert. I think Herbert, and the only reason I'm giving it to him is because I think he has big play potential right now in the present, and he has a high enough name that if you needed some drafts, if you needed a trade, it's a great value. So dynasty, you got to look at that too, and I think that because of his value, you could probably get more out of him, even if you do trade him after a season or two.
Yeah, I'm actually going to disagree with both of you. I would take Trevor Lawrence. So I think because he plays for the Jaguars, I mean, hashtag shout out Duval County out there, but because he plays for the Jaguars, people overlook him. I've watched every game he's played in this year. He's looked fantastic. Doug Peterson has him looking like a number one overall pick, which, again, I think he would have been fine last year. Not great, but fine without Urban Meyer. So Urban Meyer was horrible. So I think everyone kind of harshly judged Trevor Lawrence for that. He looks awesome this year. I mean, he just played a good Chargers defense and he actually shredded them. So I like Trevor Lawrence long term. He's an alpha. He's always been an alpha. He's an elite thrower of the football. He's also athletic. So give me Trevor Lawrence long term. That's who I'm riding with. Okay, next question is from SS Captain Big Boy with an I. So I guess cool name. And his question is, looking at the NFC South, the Buccaneers are on top and the other teams are all one game behind. Do you think that the Buccaneers can still win the division even with the injuries? If not, who do you think wins the division? Jace, what do you think?
Um, I am worried about, I guess, the Bucks as far as injury is concerned. Um, Now I know one of the receivers sat out not because of injury last week. We won't get too much into that, but um,
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm a little bit worried. I don't know if they can for sure cover, but some of those other teams have not looked great either. Namely the Panthers. Man, I'm honestly not huge on any of these. I think if I was a betting man, I'd probably half take the Bucks over the other two or over the other three. Falcons though would probably be my other choice, but I mean, I don't like any of them.
I mean, I'll step in here. It's going to be the Bucks. I mean, if you say otherwise, you're either foolish or you're foolish. I mean, plain and simple. The Buccaneers defense is the number one scoring defense in the league through 3 weeks so far. Their defense can shut it down, and their struggle is on the offensive side where Tom Brady's at. So you know they're going to figure it out. And their injuries are early. They're early and they're not major injuries. I mean, Mike Evans suspended. Donovan Smith, he had a hyperextended elbow. Julio Jones has a slight PCL tear, which is, it's a 2 week, 10-day recovery time. Chris Godwin, he'll be back. So they're only going to get healthier, and their offense is only going to get better. Their defense is stout right now. Like I said, number one scoring defense. They're number four against the run this year so far through 3 weeks, and number 7 or 8 against the pass. The only team I think would have a shot at taking it from the Bucks is the Panthers, and that's only because once again they have a great defense in this NFC South, but their offense is garbage. Like Baker Mayfield, if anyone watched the last game, he couldn't complete anything. They're playing at home. I mean, there was no excuse. There's people wide open. He couldn't hit them. So, I mean, I'm sure I'm going to hear from Kyle right now saying it's going to be the Panthers because Christian
But
McCaffrey's
one
a
sec, one
god or
sec.
whatever.
Just
But
chime
that's
in.
it.
I think Saints also have a good defense. I think NFC South has a solid defense as
No, they
well,
do. I
but we'll
think,
see.
yeah.
So,
No, the Saints do, but they also have Jameis at quarterback, who he threw just as many touchdowns to the Bucks when they played as he did to his own team. So
so
we were happy to give him away for
for
that
the
reason.
sake of consistency, I have to stick with my preseason pick because it's still week 3 and go with the Panthers. But I will say I'm a lot more worried about that pick than I was 3 weeks ago. But again, I want to be an honesty broker. I'm fantasy football's honesty broker, so I'm staying consistent. I'm going to stay with the Panthers. I think they have a top 2 defense in the league if you've watched their games, especially with how bad their offense has been. The defense has been on the field all game, and they're still shutting people down. So love the defense.
Well, they don't have a top two defense in the league, statistically speaking.
No, I think they're top 3 in the league right now, statistically speaking. Yards given up. So give me the Panthers to still win that division. What concerns me the most about the Buccaneers isn't necessarily their receivers. I think that Tom Brady has made it work in the past with a bunch of plumbers. I'm actually more concerned about their injuries on the offensive line because those guys aren't coming back, and the ones that aren't coming back super soon. So
Well, Donovan Smith should be back next game. He was their
yeah,
starting
yeah,
left
but
tackle, and he won't give it one
I know they
sack this
got
year.
their
So
centers out, they've got guards out, so like it's actually the offensive line that hasn't looked good for me. That concerns me about the Buccaneers. So yeah, a little bit worried about them. Okay, now one more question. Yeah, we got time for one more.
we're at 25 minutes. So I don't know if we do.
Okay, NFC North. Who wins the NFC North? That's the question that I got from Viking. His name's Viking, but he spelled it with a VF, so I don't know. Viking, who do you think wins the NFC North? I will go first. I don't think it's the Packers. I said last week whoever won between the Vikings and Lions, I think is winning. So give me the Vikings, even though they've kind of had some struggles since their Week 1 win over Green Bay.
Yeah, with me, same thing. I'm sticking with who I had earlier in the season. It's going to be the Vikings at 1. It's going to be the Lions at 2, and it's going to be the Packers at 3. The Packers barely beat the Bucks when we had 8 offensive starters out. So there's that.
Um,
It's not going to be the Bears. That's a fact.
So here's the thing for me. I think it's still going to be the Lions, only because how many of you were able to see that game last week? So
I
Yep,
watched it.
watched it.
Lions look good early on.
So the
But
Lions
finish.
lost
Close.
because they allowed themselves to lose. It wasn't anything huge. It was one first down away from a win. Like they looked phenomenal, especially offensively. Defense, they do have some stuff to figure out. Defensive line wasn't there, and so I think they do have some stuff to figure out. But they should have won that game. They're going to come back and they're going to play Minnesota again. We'll see how that pans out because that's last week, so it kind of depends on playoffs and who's being sat and stuff like that. But um, I think that the Lions should beat both the Bears and the Green Bay Packers, and I think they could clinch up that division. But they kind of got to earn that
No,
respect again because they lost to the Vikings already.
I like the Lions, Jace, but when you say, "Oh, they should have won, but they forced themselves to lose," that's worse than just getting beat. Is you allowing yourself to
No,
lose
it's
the game?
not.
So I don't think the
No,
Lions
it's
know
not.
how to win.
That's literally the Atlanta Falcons.
No.
That's the
So
Atlanta
here's
Yeah.
Falcons.
here's
So
They look good. They look good for 3.5 quarters.
here's
and
the
they lose in the
difference.
last
Okay,
half of the quarter.
one is you have the ability to win, which means you're at least in a somewhat decent spot. The Lions have that ability now. They did not last year. Most of their wins came off of just grit, which is ridiculous. And I mean, if we're being honest, now they actually have some talent backing it up. So now they have the ability to win. And I definitely think that they're making the Minnesota Vikings look foolish, especially in the first quarter. So yeah, they have some consistency they need to fill in, but they have the ability. It's there. They just need to finish out. That one I'm blaming on the coaches more than the team itself. So
yeah, that's a problem. But okay,
I will say this though. I do think this is. I mean, this is the last thing I'm going to throw in here, but I do think that the NFC is actually it's really weak this year, and I can see 3 teams from the NFC North making the playoffs as the Packers,
no,
Lions, and Vikings. I'm saying it
I
right
can
now.
see two.
okay,
I don't. I think only one team from the South is making it, and I think only 2 teams from the NFC West are going to make it. The NFC East is garbage. It's going to be the Eagles.
okay. That's all we got time for today. Look out for our betting tips coming out Fridays on for Sunday games, as well as next week. We're going to start our segment for what's more likely starting after week 4. So tune in for that. Tune in for our quarterback, tight end, wide receiver, and running backs